which is very revelatory, as you know, about Meghan and Harry, I got absolutely no help from the palace whatsoever. On the contrary, I think it's mixed. I think that once she saw Meghan when she came to London in 2016, 2018, and she reached out to Victoria to get freebies. And I must say, it's always beyond Meghan. Meghan doesn't believe in reconciliation. Look at her appalling relationship with her father. She's a hard nut. Meghan left Britain and then did the Oprah Winfrey interview. It's been really poisonous. Mm-hmm. Well, he does it because he needs a profile. That's the only way they can get money, by showing the profile. And for Netflix, everything is built around the future documentary series to promote the Sussexes. Meghan has got no real income anymore. She's finished.
Right.
The Netflix series is over. There's no great podcast. They don't generate any money. And I don't see where she is going from here. I think she has a major problem.
Why Meghan?
Well, because she posed a challenge to the royal family, and she's a fascinating person. I mean, she's a person who started from nothing and has become a world global star. And that route to the top has never really been properly reported and examined and investigated. In the trailer, there are 27,000 comments. 95% of them were negative. So they already knew there was a problem of the image. There was also the Vanity Fair article, which is, American Hustle was a huge blow.
We love it. We love to see it.
To Meghan. So it was opportune. And of course, by then she also knew that her brand was in great trouble. Meghan had already recorded their poison for Netflix. It was already edited. All the stuff that we heard today about Charles lying, about William screaming and shouting, was in the can, was being edited.
Tom Bower, where he doesn't go there. He doesn't go there. But he does go there as far as the fact that they wanted to keep the birth private and all the secrecy around that, and even the fact that...
This story revolves around two names, Meghan Markle and Tom Bower. Say them together, and everything sharpens. Meghan and Harry aren't strangers to lawsuits. They've sued papers, publishers, photographers. Legal action has been their default weapon. So when Bower released Revenge, many expected the usual response. But nothing came. No lawsuit, no injunction, just vague hints, warnings, and anonymous whispers about legal options. That silence speaks volumes. Bower didn't insult Meghan. He documented Pattern's behavior, control, consequences. Claims like that aren't countered with outrage. They require evidence. And evidence never appeared. That's why the lawsuit stayed imaginary. And she reached out to Victoria to get freebies. Victoria was happy to see her clothes on Meghan. Very good-looking woman, the Duchess. Whatever Meghan was wearing would be an instant sellout. But Meghan had her own way of dealing with people who were trying to use her. She wanted not only freebies, but wanted some sort of payment too, which wasn't allowed under the rules of the royal palace. So that stung Meghan. I think Meghan then got worried, as I tell in the book. To understand why Meghan never sued, you have to see what Bower actually exposed, not emotionally, but structurally. He didn't rely on rumors. He relied on corroborated behavior. One of the most damaging aspects of Revenge isn't scandal, it's consistency. The same complaints about Meghan came from completely different people, in different places, at different times, with no reason to coordinate. Staff, former friends, industry contacts, royal aides, media figures, different worlds, same patterns. Bower documented how relationships often followed a predictable arc. Intense charm at the start, usefulness and proximity to power, then sudden distancing or hostility once that usefulness ended.
These are words which he has rehearsed and which he's delivering to make a point, to make his own fortune. And of course the casualty is not only the royal family, but Britain's reputation too, across the world. It is really quite tragic that he's been allowed and encouraged to make these sort of allegations, which has no evidence. And of course, full of contradictions, dishonest.
Legally, patterns speak louder than motive. They only need repetition. Bower also zeroed in on control, not fame, not ambition, but who gets a voice, who gets cut off, who disappears from Meghan's orbit. Several sources refused to go on record, not because they disagreed, but out of fear, legal consequences, reputation damage, professional retaliation. That fear isn't defamatory if true. Crucially, Bauer never painted Meghan as powerless or unlucky. Instead, he portrayed her as strategic, commercially aware, and deliberate about branding, status, and leverage. That framing flips the usual victim narrative. In court, it matters. Suing Bauer wouldn't just mean claiming something is false, it would require explaining why multiple unrelated people describe her the same way. Why did friendships end abruptly? Why did staff complaints follow identical patterns? Why were legal threats a recurring reaction to criticism?
Oh, on the contrary, I think she's a very scheming, very clever woman. No, I think the surprisingly, at the end of the book, I realized how successful she'd been. Here was a woman who was nothing. I mean, born, broken family, the whole thing, an unknown actress, all the rest of it, becomes a global star, which is what she wanted.
Why did so many sources confirm details privately but refuse to testify publicly? Because a lawsuit wouldn't silence them, it would amplify their voices. And that's why the legal threat stayed vague. Legally, this is where it gets uncomfortable. If Meghan sued Bauer, the courtroom wouldn't dwell on vibes or intent. It would examine specific claims that were carefully worded, narrowly framed, and extremely hard to disprove. 4 years, she has kept these doors closed. One of the riskiest factors: witness credibility. Bauer has repeatedly stated that many people spoke to him off the record, not because they were lying, but because they feared retaliation.
That 2025 was going to be the year of the Markle sparkle. And maybe she would say in the last few weeks that she's accepting a Humanitarian of the Year award. She might say, see, but for the most part, I didn't see.
This matters because, in a lawsuit, Meghan's legal team would almost certainly demand to know Bauer's sources. That's the nightmare scenario. Once a case is filed, Bauer could be compelled to identify sources under protected conditions, and the court could then decide whether those people must testify, especially if their testimony supports the book's accuracy. Imagine the fallout. Former staff explaining patterns of behavior, friends describing how relationships ended, industry contacts clarifying closed doors, royal aides outlining timelines and internal responses. Even if Meghan won on individual claims, the process alone would expose more than the book ever did. Then there's documentation. Bauer's work relies on emails, messages, schedules, third-party confirmations, and cross-check timelines. He layers accounts until contradictions disappear. If Meghan sued, her own records, texts, emails, calendars, contracts, PR communications, legal notes would come under scrutiny. Once discovery begins, control evaporates. Truth isn't determined by who shouts loudest, it's determined by what can be verified. Bauer never accused Meghan of crimes. He documented strategy, image management, and the use of pressure as a tool.
Accusation not for Winfrey. Also, I think they're reserving that sort of attack for Meghan's own book, for which we must now look forward in a year's time or so.
Those claims aren't defamatory if supported by witnesses, documents, and timelines. That's why the lawsuit threat stayed vague enough to intimidate, but never concrete enough to risk legal exposure. Because once Meghan steps into court against Bauer, she's no longer shaping the narrative, she's answering questions. Here's the key pattern. Meghan Markle doesn't avoid lawsuits, she chooses them. She sues when the target is a newspaper, publisher, or photographer with deep pockets and predictable risk. Those cases share one thing: limited exposure. Suits over press publications focus narrowly private letters, copyright, procedural errors, not her personality or behavior. That distinction explains everything.
The crack, and I think Harry, whereas he's come over, he didn't stay after the funeral, he didn't stay after the coronation. I think he's come because his father clearly asked him to come, but I don't see any sign of forgiveness from the other members of the family for the terrible lies and disloyalty which he's shown.
Because suing Bauer would be a completely different fight. He's not a tabloid editor chasing clicks, he's an investigative writer who expects challenges and structures his books to survive hostile legal review. Every chapter is built to withstand cross-examination. That's why Meghan's legal strategy stopped short. She can threaten, hint, and let allies whisper about action, but filing changes the rules. A press lawsuit asks, was this private? A defamation lawsuit asks, is this true? That second question is one Meghan has consistently avoided, where facts, not feelings, matter. That's why the meltdown narrative exists, not because she's emotional, but because leverage shifted. Bauer didn't insult her. He documented her. And documentation doesn't fold under pressure. So instead of court, the strategy pivoted. Discredit the author, question his tone, imply legal consequences without triggering them.
Meghan, she's ambitious, she's good-looking, she is determined, she succeeded in getting a good script with suits and everything, and in the end she succeeded in getting a man who built her up, who she was looking for all along. But on the other hand, on the way, there were many victims. And I think that the victims are obviously the people I looked for, because she did her very best to prevent her friends and the people she'd worked with.
The public expected Meghan to respond eventually, but attention didn't move on, because people noticed the gap. She sues nearly everyone, except the one man who scrutinized her entire trajectory. And when audiences notice avoidance, they assume risk. When people say Meghan is about to sue Tom Bauer, they usually mean one of four things, and each hits the same wall. Reason 1. Defamation. Weakest of all. Defamation requires proving statements are false, damaging, and made without adequate sourcing. Bauer didn't write in absolutes. He didn't invent secret acts or hidden crimes. He documented behavior, patterns, and reactions backed by multiple accounts. In court, Meghan wouldn't argue tone, she'd argue truth. And truth isn't decided by press releases. Reason 2. Malicious intent. This fails too. Bauer has a long history of critical biographies. He doesn't single out Meghan. His method is consistent. Document ambition, map relationships, track consequences. Courts punish errors, not unflattering reporting. Reason 3. Harm to reputation. Here, irony is unavoidable. To claim reputational damage, Meghan would have to show a measurable drop caused directly by the book, not her interviews, documentaries, podcasts, or public statements. Nearly impossible when the decline aligns with her own media output.
Prince Harry and Meghan lying about the Princess of Wales, Catherine. Now, ITV has announced that Prince Harry has taken part in a documentary about phone hacking. I'm just curious to know, is violating someone else's privacy really the hill Prince Harry wants to die on? I mean, has he read the pages of Spare?
A judge would ask the question no PR team wants to hear. How do you separate this book from everything else voluntarily put in the public domain? Reason 4. Intimidation. The lawsuit talk itself is pressure warning smaller voices, chilling discussion, signaling caution. But this only works when credible. The longer no lawsuit appears, the weaker the threat. Filing now wouldn't look strategic. It would look reactive, desperate, the exact image Meghan has spent years avoiding. Bauer continues to speak confidently because he knows the pressure points. He isn't chasing headlines. People familiar with his work report that he has unused material, interviews never published, details held back for legal timing. The silence isn't weakness, it's calculated.
Well, she's actually composed again, and never talks about it. I mean, the whole problem she found with this last Vanity Fair issue, the hustle issue, is that she couldn't control the content. And she is somebody who believes, understandably, she's got to control everything down to the last full.
That's the leverage, not what Bauer said, but what he didn't publish. Every calm interview is a reminder. The file isn't closed. Meghan understands that danger. Her silence isn't restraint, it's containment. As long as Bauer repeats the same facts, the unasked question grows louder. What happens if he says more? That's why she wants him quiet, not erased, just frozen in time. There was a decisive shift in media calculus. For years, editors treated Meghan's legal threats as radioactive. Even the hint of a lawsuit softened language, removed names, or killed segments. Nobody wanted the next headline about bullying or harassment. Then something changed. Journalists realized the biggest threat was never carried out. No writ, no filing, no discovery, no courtroom, and crucially, no correction forced on Bauer.
Absolutely, but of course, the queuing to see the Queen, last respects to the Queen, was very carefully contrived by his media advisors. And isn't it funny how the media got a tip-off just 2 hours after he joined the queue?
Once that pattern became obvious, the fear evaporated. Producers invited Bauer back on air. Commentators referenced revenge openly. YouTubers stopped hedging. Even mainstream outlets summarized his arguments instead of dismissing them. Suddenly, the lawsuit threat flipped from weapon to weakness. Every legal hint now raises questions. Why now, after all this time? And why not when the book first came out? In media logic, timing is credibility. If you don't act when the damage allegedly occurs, later threats seem performative and attempt to regain control rather than defend truth. By then, the narrative had hardened. Bauer writes things people don't like, but he writes things that survive. Those who lie about him don't sue him.
So 2025 was the beginning of something very, very exciting for her, because not least, We Love Meghan was going to appear a few weeks into the new year. And then, of course, it all goes wrong. But on that day, New Year's Day, she could only hope, well, it's, the new year can only get better.
That isn't sympathy, it's reputation. Once the media stops flinching, leverage disappears. Here's the blunt truth missing from fan defenses. Meghan's lawyers know exactly how a case against Bauer would play out, not emotionally or politically, but procedurally. A defamation suit in the UK or US would immediately trigger discovery. That's not optional. Discovery is where narratives die. It doesn't care about tone, trauma, or intention. It cares about contemporaneous emails, internal PR discussions, instructions to agents and intermediaries, messages sent in conflict, timelines that don't bend, and most dangerous of all, discovery is two-way. Meghan wouldn't just examine Bauer's notes. His lawyers would examine hers. Communications with former friends, staff who raised concerns, media figures who were leaned on, all at risk of scrutiny.
Meghan made that accusation, not Oprah Winfrey. Also, I think they're reserving that sort of attack for Meghan's own book, for which we must now look forward in a year's time or something.
Exactly.
But I did think it was very interesting.
Intermediaries often kill lawsuits before they begin, not because the client is wrong, but because the risk is asymmetric. Bauer's exposure is limited to his research file. Meghan's exposure is her entire recent life. Documented, time-stamped, and cross-referenced by third parties no longer loyal. Winning doesn't mean emerging unscathed. Even a narrow legal victory could reopen stories far more damaging than anything in revenge. Courts don't seal embarrassment, they record it. That's why advisors say, let's imply, not let's sue. Implication preserves control. Litigation destroys it. This is where Meghan Markle and Tom Bauer collide in a very calculated way. When she hints at legal action, it's almost never about court, it's about reasserting dominance over a narrative slipping from her grasp. Bauer is uniquely threatening to her brand, not a tabloid, not a YouTuber, not a random commentator.
And she has made it. She was in third-rate acting, and she's now a global icon. That isn't success, and she wanted it. She said to her father when she was a young girl, I just want to be famous on the red carpet, and she's made it. But I think on the way, what she's done is damaging. And that's what the book does. It tells the story of a girl who came from a broken family, who struggled very hard, and is, in her terms, has made it.
Bauer is a journalist built to survive lawsuits. Every line he publishes anticipates legal scrutiny before it arrives. Claims are anchored in sources, patterns, and corroboration, not gossip. That's why he hasn't been sued, and Meghan knows it. Instead, we see a familiar pattern. Anonymous sources hinting at legal options, sympathetic media framing her as considering action, vague statements about misinformation or accountability. Never a filing. Never a claim number. Never a courtroom. This isn't hesitation, it's strategy.
I think what happened was they asked him to put a figure on it, and they thought, let's include that too. This is all conjecture, this is all fantasy, but it's selling his book and selling an attack on the royal family. And of course, he is perfectly safe in Britain. The protection argument has always been used by him to make himself important.
Lawsuit talk serves multiple purposes without the risk. First, it intimidates smaller critics even if it never touches Bauer. Second, it rallies supporters who mistake silence for fear. Third, it reframes the story, shifting focus from what Bauer exposed to how unfair it feels. Fourth, it buys time, which is often the real goal. The part people rarely admit, if Meghan actually sued Bauer, she'd lose control of the story. Opposing counsel, judges, transcripts, public records power would transfer from her to the courtroom. So the threats stay vague. Outrage stays performative. No lawsuit means she can claim the moral high ground without entering the factual battlefield. This is the point everyone dances around, but it's the point that matters most.
He had a purpose when he lived in London and was a member of the royal family. But there he is on the west coast. He can go paddling, he can sit in his garden and smoke. But what else has he got to do? And I must say, it's always beyond Meghan. Meghan doesn't believe in reconciliation. Look at her appalling relationship with her father. She's a hard nut to crack. And I think Harry, whereas he's come over, he didn't stay after the funeral, he didn't stay after the coronation.
Bauer didn't hit Meghan with one explosive claim. He threatened her with structure, chronology, and corroborated motive decisions connected across years rather than isolated as accidents. What rattled her wasn't a passage here or there, it was the cumulative picture. Point 1. He framed her as commercially strategic, not emotionally reactive. Bauer didn't portray Meghan as overwhelmed by royal life. He portrayed her as someone who understood leverage, titles, proximity, access, and moved quickly to monetize and control them. That flips the victim narrative on its head. Point 2. He documented patterns of pressure, not isolated conflicts or staff turnover.